In the age when the 9 worlds were young and the roots of Yggdrasil still trembled with new life, there dwelt among the Vanir a god of such brightness and strength that the people of Midgard called him the bringer of peace, of plenty, and of joy. This was Freyr, son of the sea god Njörðr and brother to fair Freyja, a lord whose power lay not in thunder or cunning, but in the green bounty of the earth, the shining of the sun, and the sacred fires of fertility. Freyr was counted among the noblest of the gods, for he governed not only harvests and fields but the prosperity of kings and the joy of households. In his name men raised altars at planting time, calling for full sheaves of barley and golden waves of wheat. To him they prayed at marriages, that love might be fruitful, and at treaties, that bloodshed might end and peace flourish. Where Odin sought wisdom and Thor sought battle, Freyr sought balance, abundance, and the well-being of the folk. When the Vanir and Aesir clashed in the Great War, it was Freyr, alongside his sister Freyja and his father Njörðr, who was given as a hostage to dwell in Asgard and bind the peace. Yet he did not come in chains, for his presence was a blessing, and soon the Aesir counted him as one of their own. It was told that none among the gods was more beloved, for he bore himself with fairness and kindness, though he was not without his sorrows and passions. Freyr possessed treasures unmatched, Skidbladnir, the ship that could hold all the gods and yet be folded into a pouch when not needed, and Gullinbursti, the golden-bristled boar who could run faster than any steed, through night or storm, his bristles blazing to light the way. These gifts he received from the cunning of dwarves, and with them he traveled far, spreading wealth and hope wherever he roamed. Yet though he was lord of peace, Freyr was also bound by desire. His heart, once calm as summer fields, was seized by a love so fierce it altered his fate. For when he looked upon Gerðr, the fair giantess, he gave away his sword, the mighty weapon that none could withstand, in exchange for her hand. And by that loss, though he gained his beloved, he sealed his doom, for without his sword he would one day face the fire giant Surtr at Ragnarok, and there meet his end. Still, men remembered him not for his death but for his life, for the harvests he blessed, the wealth he granted, and the peace he wove among warring clans. In Sweden especially his name was revered, kings claimed descent from him, temples rose in his honor, and his statues were gilded with gold. He was the shining god, the giver of plenty, the Lord who rode in chariots drawn by boars, whose presence brought joy as surely as spring follows winter. Thus begins the tale of Freyr, the bright one, whose myths tell of treasures won, of love gained at great cost, and of valor that endures even unto the world's ending. In the time when treasures of wonder were forged by dwarves beneath stone halls, Freyr gained one of the greatest marvels of all, the ship called Skidbladnir. Its story begins with a wager, a test of cunning that drew Loki, the sly one, into the halls of the mastersmiths. Loki, ever weaving schemes, had angered the gods and sought to mend his standing by bringing them gifts of surpassing worth. He went down into Svartalfheim, where the sons of Ivaldi and the brothers Brakr and Sindri worked their forges. To the Ivaldi's sons he urged the crafting of treasures, a golden hair for Sif, wife of Thor, to replace the locks he had shorn, and also a ship of such perfection that no other could compare. The dwarves labored, and from their furnace they drew Skidbladnir. Its planks were of finest timber, its sails caught the lightest breeze, and its magic made it unfailing. When spread upon the sea, the ship bore every god with ease, gliding swifter than the wind, steady against storm and wave. Yet when the voyage was ended, the ship could be folded as if of cloth, small enough to rest in a pouch at one's belt. Loki bore this wonder to Asgard, where it was laid before Freyr. Of all the gods, he was the one most fitting, for he was lord of prosperity, and his gift would be a vessel that carried peace and plenty wherever it sailed. Freyr marveled, for in Skidbladnir he saw a symbol of his own power, vast yet yielding, mighty yet bountiful, as ready for voyage as for rest. With Skidbladnir, Freyr could traverse the seas of Midgard and the skies that bridged the worlds. Wherever its sails rose, winds shifted in his favor, and no harbor was closed to him. Kings who saw it felt awe, farmers who glimpsed it in vision rejoiced, for they knew it carried the god whose blessing filled their fields. Yet the tale of Skidbladnir does not end with its gift. For though it was unmatched, it was also bound to Freyr's destiny. Some skalds say he seldom used it, for his boar Gullinbursti was swifter on land and could blaze through night. Others say he carried it folded always at his side, as a token of journeys yet to come, a promise of hope even in the shadow of Ragnarok. Thus Freyr's ship was counted among the greatest works of dwarfcraft, a vessel both mighty and small, a gift of peace and of promise. And though other gods boasted weapons of thunder or wisdom of runes, Freyr's treasure was a ship, a symbol of plenty, of voyage, of horizons ever open to the bright god of prosperity. Not long after Freyr gained Skidbladnir, another wonder came into his keeping, the golden-bristled boar Gullinbursti, whose light could pierce the darkest night and whose swiftness outran the fleetest steeds. This gift too was born of a wager in the forges of the dwarves, when Loki sought to mend his standing with the gods through treasures of unmatched worth. The brothers Brokr and Sindri, stung by Loki's boast that none could equal the sons of Ivaldi, set their hammers to work. Into the furnace they placed the hide of a wild boar, while Brokr pumped the bellows without pause. Loki, unwilling to lose the wager, transformed into a fly and bit Brokr's hand as he worked, seeking to break his focus. Yet the dwarf held steady, though sweat and blood dripped from his fingers. When the furnace was opened, a creature leapt forth, a boar with bristles of pure gold, each shining so brightly that the night itself retreated before it. This boar they named Gullinbursti, Golden Bristle, and to Freyr it was given, for no god was more fitting to ride such a beast. Where Thor had his goats and Odin his steed Sleipnir, Freyr now had Gullinbursti, who could carry him across earth, sea, and sky swifter than any chariot, tireless and sure-footed. His bristles gleamed like dawn over fields of barley, lighting the way for harvesters and warriors alike. It is told that Freyr rode Gullinbursti often, his presence like the rising sun. In Midgard, farmers who saw golden light upon the horizon prayed that it was Freyr astride his boar, blessing the furrows with bounty. Warriors, seeing its glow in dreams, believed they were marked for valor. Even in the deep forests where shadows lingered, Gullinbursti's light banished fear, and no creature dared oppose its rider. At Baldr's funeral, when the gods bore the Shining One to his pyre upon his ship, Freyr came riding Gullinbursti, his golden steed bright as flame against the grief of the hall. So was the boar bound to the cycles of both life and death, just as Freyr himself governed the joys of harvest and the sorrows of loss. Thus Freyr held two treasures from the dwarves, the ship that could sail any sea, and the boar that could blaze any path. Skidbladnir promised safe journeys and plenty, Gullinbursti promised light and swiftness. Together they marked Freyr as a god not only of fertility and peace, but of wondrous strength, a giver of hope whose treasures bore him swiftly wherever his blessing was needed. Though Freyr was a god of peace and prosperity, his fate was often tied to the Njörðr, the giants who dwelt in Jotunheim, the wild land beyond the ordered realms of the gods. To the Aesir and Vanir alike, the Njörðr were foes, ever plotting against Asgard. Yet the line between enemy and kin was never clear, for many of the gods themselves were born of giant blood, and often desire or need bound them to their ancient rivals. So it was with Freyr. Among the giants there were those who feared his light, for wherever he went the earth grew fertile, and their barren strongholds were shamed by his bounty. Yet others coveted him, as their fathers had coveted Freyja, seeking to bind him through bargains or through marriage. Time and again envoys came from Jotunheim, offering wealth or threatening ruin if Freyr would not join them. But he, like his sister, stood fast, choosing his path by his own will. One tale tells of a giantess who demanded his hand, promising mountains of silver and rivers of gold if he would forsake Asgard. Freyr laughed, for to him gold and silver were but tears of the earth, empty without the joy of men's harvests or the songs of children in the fields. Another tells of a giant warrior who challenged him in open combat, only to be blinded by the light of Gullinbursti's bristles and driven back into the shadows of his homeland. Yet Freyr's dealings with the Njörðr were not all battle and rejection. For it was from their halls that his greatest love would one day come, Gerðr, whose beauty struck him like a spear. Even before that tale unfolded, the skalds sang that Freyr often gazed beyond the walls of Asgard, restless, drawn to the wilds of Jotunheim. Perhaps he knew that his fate was woven there, that no peace he blessed in Midgard could endure unless he too made peace with the blood of giants. Thus Freyr stood as a bridge between foes. A Vanir among the Asir, a god who courted a giantess, a lord of peace who was never free from war. His name was spoken in Jotunheim with both hatred and longing, for they knew that in him lay the strength of summer, the fire of desire, and the destiny that bound gods and giants alike toward the final twilight. It happened one day that Freyr, seated in Odin's high throne Hliskjolf while the All-Father was away, gazed out over the 9 worlds. From that seat no place was hidden, no hall too distant, no heart too secret. He looked far and wide, through Midgard and beyond, until his eyes fell upon Jotunheim, the land of giants. There, in the shining hall of Gerðr, walked a maiden so radiant that the very air about her glowed. Her arms shone brighter than the sun across the heavens, and her beauty pierced Freyr's heart like a spear. This maiden was Gerðr, daughter of Gerðr and the mountain giantess Orboda. From that moment, Freyr knew no peace. He returned to his own seat, but his spirit was restless. He lost his joy in food and drink, he spoke little to the other gods, and even his treasures brought him no comfort. Freyr's servant Skirnir, wise and bold, saw his master's torment and pressed him to speak. At last Freyr confessed, he had seen a maiden so fair that life without her seemed empty. Yet she was of the giants, their ancient foes, and he despaired that she would ever come willingly to his side. Skirnir offered to act on his behalf, to go as messenger and suitor. Freyr placed into Skirnir's hand gifts of great price, a sword that fought of its own will, shining with the might of the elves, and a golden ring. Mounting the swift horse that could leap through fire and shadow, Skirnir rode into Jotunheim. When he came to Gerðr's hall, he laid the gifts before her, speaking of Freyr's longing. But Gerðr, proud and strong-willed, refused. She would not be bought with trinkets, nor wed to one who was enemy to her kin. Skirnir's voice grew sharper. He warned her of curses, of barren years and endless solitude, if she denied Freyr. Still she resisted, until at last he threatened her with the deepest sorcery, binding her fate with fearsome runes. Then Gerðr yielded, not for love of Skirnir's threats, but because destiny itself wove her path toward Freyr. She named a place where they would meet, a grove where 9 nights must pass before she came to him. When Skirnir returned and told Freyr the news, the god's heart lifted, though impatience gnawed at him. 1 night is long, 2 nights longer still, he said, but 9 nights are an eternity. Yet he endured, and in time Gerðr came, fair as the dawn, and there she joined her life to his. So Freyr won his bride, but at a cost. For the sword he had given Skirnir, his most precious weapon, would never return to his side. And though his love with Gerðr burned bright, the loss of that blade would one day lead him to stand unarmed against the fire giant Surtr at Ragnarok. Thus in the joy of union was also sown the seed of his doom. Among the gods, few weapons were as prized as the sword Freyr once bore. Forged with elvish cunning, it was a blade that could fight of its own will, flashing with a light that split shadow and striking with a force no shield could withstand. With that sword at his side, Freyr was unassailable, a god of peace whose might was so sure he scarcely needed to draw it. Yet for love, even such a treasure was given away. When Freyr's desire for Gerðr consumed him, he sent his servant Skirnir to woo her. To aid him, he surrendered that sword as a gift and a token of power. Skirnir bore it into Jotunheim and never returned it, for once Gerðr had been won, the sword was no longer his master's. Freyr, in his joy, scarcely thought of what he had lost. To him, Gerðr's hand was worth more than any steel. But the Skalds knew, and the Norns wove the truth, that loss would weigh upon him until the world's end. For though Freyr still rode Gullinbursti and bore antler or axe in hunts, the sword was gone, and with it the surety of victory. The other gods murmured among themselves, for they foresaw the day when such a weapon would be needed. Odin, grim and wise, said nothing, but his one eye turned often toward Freyr, as if measuring what love had cost him. Tales spread of Freyr facing foes without his sword. Against giants he fought with a stag's antler, a weapon of the wild. Against trolls he wielded a great axe. And though he triumphed, each victory bore the shadow of what was lost. For no antler, no axe, no spear could match the singing blade that once had leapt in his hand like living flame. Still, Freyr did not repent. For Gerðr's beauty and their union filled him with peace, and the fields of Midgard flourished under his blessing. Farmers reaped full harvests, kings prospered, and children thrived. To them it mattered little what weapon their god had laid aside. To them, his love was proof of his power, for through desire and union came life renewed. Yet destiny is unyielding. The skalds sang that when Surtr, the fire giant, strode forth from Muspelheim at Ragnarok, Freyr would stand in his path. Surtr's sword blazed with the fire that would consume the worlds, and Freyr, unarmed, would face him with naught but an antler. There, love's price would be paid in full, for without his own sword, the bright god could not prevail. Thus the loss of the sword was not merely a gift but a doom. In winning Gerðr, Freyr gained love yet lost the means to survive the final war. So his tale became a lesson whispered through ages, that even gods are bound by sacrifice, and that every joy carries its cost. When the twilight of the gods drew near, omens spread across the worlds. Brothers slew brothers, bonds of kinship withered, winters came unbroken, and wolves chased the sun and moon. All knew Ragnarok was at hand, and the gods prepared for their final stand. Among them was Freyr, lord of peace and fertility, whose laughter once brightened halls, but whose heart now grew heavy with foreknowledge. For he alone among the gods would go to war without the sword that once had been his, the shining blade he had surrendered for Gerðr's hand. As the giants massed, Freyr rode forth on Gullinbursti, his golden-bristled boar, light blazing like dawn across the darkened plain of Vigrid. Farmers of Midgard, in their last hours, looked to that glow and took heart, believing that even in death their fields would not be forsaken. Freyr's presence was summer itself, the fullness of harvest, the promise that life had meaning even in its ending. From Muspelheim came Surtr, the fire giant, black as ash and crowned with flame. In his hand he bore a sword brighter than the sun, a weapon that burned with the heat to consume the worlds. Where he walked, rivers boiled and mountains split, and even the gods felt dread at his approach. Yet it was Freyr who strode forth to meet him, unflinching, though in his hand he bore no sword, only a great stag's antler. The clash was terrible. Surtr's fire roared against Freyr's light, flame and dawn colliding on the plain of Vigrid. With his antler, Freyr struck mighty blows, felling giant after giant, his strength undimmed though his weapon was crude. He fought not with hatred, but with the fierce resolve of one who protects life itself. Yet at last Surtr raised his flaming sword, and the antler splintered under its heat. Freyr fell, and his blood mingled with the scorched earth. So perished Freyr, not by weakness of will, but because love had bound him to sacrifice. For had he still held the sword of the elves, he might have matched Surtr blow for blow. Yet without it, he faced his fate bravely, and in his fall the gods saw the price of peace and desire. When the fire consumed the world, and all was ash and silence, it was remembered that Freyr had been a giver. He gave his sword for love, his light for hope, his life for the last battle. And though Ragnarok ended the age of gods, it is said that in a world reborn, fields will again bear grain, rivers will again run clear, and children will again laugh under the sun. In that renewal lives the memory of Freyr, whose death was not defeat, but the seed of life's return.